The first question I always ask is, what does the conversation about yourself to yourself sound like? Because a lot of the times you will find when we come to mental health or emotional health even, is the conversation is always about themselves and the circumstance. And if that conversation is not resolved or remains within conflict or confusion, that's what drives the inability to see yourself as something.
In life, we can sometimes have goals and we can sometimes have directions and paths that we kind of want to see ourselves go down.
Amen.
And sometimes there's dead ends and sometimes there's direction changes. Talk to me about not being able to reach the heights that you probably wanted to.
Yeah, I usually call that chapter, I often call that chapter the plane that never took off. It was tough, I feel, post high school, signed with the Brisbane Broncos, by that stage, my dad had moved back to Africa and to help rebuild Africa, build schools and stuff like that. So I'd called him up and said, Dad, I've made it. Things are going to change. I waited 3 years to make my NRL debut, only to get the tap on the shoulder from Wayne Bennett himself and let me know that the club's moving forward and I'm not part of the plans. And with that, it resulted in me going to, the dark place. Self-worth was decreased, and substance abuse became, the forefront of it all. I was fortunate enough to receive a phone call from Des Hasler, who threw me a 1-year contract with the Manly Sea Eagles. But by then, the mind games was too much for me. And I wanted to experience life, not having to wait for people to validate me as being good enough. And that's ultimately why I walked away from the game of rugby league. As much as I loved it, I wasn't in love with it. And so that's how that chapter closed. And I went and started performing arts.
And I know you obviously mentioned substance abuse there. I'm a mental health first aid instructor, so very passionate around that mental health side of things. And on the podcast, I've had people that have, come from the military, and gone through their own struggles. One of the key things I wanted to ask you was, what do you think, because obviously whether it's, sporting, whether it's military, whether it's first responders, lots of different industries, they invest so much into getting you into it and then they're supporting you in it. But then afterwards, when that transition comes from being a professional sporting, a professional sports star to then back to normal life, what do you think is missing or what do you think needs to be done from a transition perspective in a lot of these industries to actually help people adjust back into that life?
This is something I talk about in my workshops as well. And, I discuss with companies. I think it's a difficult thing. I don't think there's one thing, because ultimately the onus is also on the person who's committed to the system or for example, in my case, I chose to invest my time and dedication and life into rugby league. And ultimately with time spent, emotions grow. And then, what tends to happen is we start to gravitate our identity towards that which we are committed to. And when that gets stripped away, there's a sense of void. And only we understand that void. So it's difficult for companies and organizations to understand what that void looks like to you. I mean, they can assist with job assistance on the way out or, help you find the perfect partner, whatever it is, and give you some money. But ultimately, the leading cause is the mental health instability. And that comes from that weird sense of, I don't know what to identify myself with or alongside. And that's what I struggle with. And, talking to my ex-teammates, it's the same thing. Some of them are making more money than they did in rugby league, but there's this weird sense of, this is not who I am. So it's a hard thing to pinpoint and say, create this system post their dedication to the craft and it'll help them, transition to a normal life. We don't know what that looks like because we were never there prior to, this post event.
So you've been through that journey, and Gideon, and what I'd love to know, and people listening to this, is if they're kind of going through that identity crisis, I suppose, and they're going through that similar journey, what are some key things that you would suggest or recommend what did you go through? What if you were going through what you went through back then, the substance abuse, struggle of identity, what would be some of the questions? What would be some of the steps that you would have taken?
Most definitely. So the first things first is have a value. And what I mean by that, that becomes the foundation of how you live your life. Most of us, we put value in what we're dedicated to. So we're very extrinsically driven. Ambition, material, whatever. So when we're extrinsically driven, when that subsides, we feel like we're empty. So you've got to start with something within you, and the value will lead you to a sense of purpose. And purpose, I was just discussing the other day, is when you're attached to a system to help a resolve. When you look at the greats like the Nelson Mandelas, Mother Teresa, Princess Diana, you find yourself based on the foundations of your value to help resolve something. And I think that's where you get that wholesome feeling. Like for me, my value and my purpose is to empower as many individuals as I can in the lifetime that I'm here, as well as meet people and, enjoy life along the side. But, ultimately that's my purpose, to remind people not to be defined by the circumstances and, build that foundation of value and then attach yourself to a purpose. And, through that purpose, you grow. So, yeah.
Yeah. Because I think in life, our purpose changes, right? You go through when you're growing up, you've got a certain purpose. Then when you get into a relationship and you're a partner, you've got a certain purpose. And then you become a parent, and then down the track, you become a grandparent. And then all these different things, change just from a parenting perspective, but also then from a work perspective, a career perspective. And it can be hard to, like for me, I was a real estate agent, 21 years this year would be in real estate. And we still own the business. But for me, I haven't worked in it for a number of years now. But it was a really hard thing, hitting burnout and losing my identity. I was attached to, well, I'm a real estate agent. That's what I've been for so long. That's my value. That's my purpose. And it was hard, similar to someone coming, who's played rugby league since they were kind of almost born, right through to then coming out when they're 30 or 35 and hang on, what do I do now? I was a top, rugby league, or I hit this level in that industry. Coming out the other end, it's kind of like, well, I'm nothing now, and I think that's a really big challenge that people have.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's why I was saying it's very important to have that foundation of a value, whereas mine is health and fitness. So regardless of what happens, go through that breakup or being made redundant, I'm always going to wake up in the morning, go to the gym, tick those boxes, still see myself as a relevant, aspect in life, and then reattack life, if you will.
Yep. So Gideon, if I was someone that came to you, had come out of a career, come out of an industry and I was just really struggling, I was feeling lost, and you sat me down, what do you think some of the questions you'd want to ask me, or what some of the questions you would ask me that would get me thinking and get me on the right path or heading in that right direction?
The first question I always ask is, what does the conversation about yourself to yourself sound like? Ultimately, because a lot of the times you will find, and, you would know this in mental health, a lot of the issues with, when we come to mental health or emotional health even, is the conversation is always about themselves and the circumstance. And if that conversation is not resolved, or it remains, within conflict or confusion, and that's what drives the inability to see yourself as something, So ultimately, yeah, what does the conversation about yourself to yourself sound like? And then start building on from there,
Yeah, that's so true though, because I know for me, for many years, when I hit burnout and I wasn't going well, people would be like, oh, are you still in real estate? And I'd go, oh no, I'm struggling with depression and fatigue and anxiety and all those kind of things. And all I was doing, and it took me years to work this out, all I was doing was just repeating that dialogue of who I was, right?
Hello.
Until, obviously I started the podcast and I became a mental health first aid instructor, and a coach and a consultant. So when people ask me now, it's, I'm a podcast, I run a podcast, and then I go, that was all led through this stuff. So it's leading with a positive. It's not just kind of reiterating and kind of talking myself down to a certain point.
Right.
That conversation changed.
Right.
And that identity has changed, which obviously then increases the confidence, increases the way you talk about yourself, the way you think, the way you show up, and gives you a greater awareness as well, backed by having that attitude of gratitude as well of the path that you've walked.
Absolutely.